All right, the president is expected to arrive in Long Island, New York, Bethpage, Long Island, to be more exact, to talk about MS-13 and worries he has about holes in our system that allow very dangerous gangs like this into the country. Doesn't my next guest know it? House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte, he's already pushing a bill right now to crack down on stuff like that, way ahead of a lot of folks on the dangers of this lethal group, among others, trying to sneak in here. Chairman, very good to have you. Thank you.
Neil, it's great to be with you and your viewers.
So what are you trying to do here? The president is obviously addressing, the most dangerous of dangerous elements, and that sums up MS-13. But for a lot of people who aren't familiar, sir, do you mind bringing us up to speed on these gangs?
Sure. Well, if you're a gang member right now and you commit a crime, you can be deported, and the Trump administration takes that very seriously, and they're doing that. But we want to change that law, and so does the president. So if you are a member of MS-13, merely proving that, if you're not lawfully present in the United States, would be a basis for deporting you from the country. Or even if you're lawfully present in the United States and you're a member of a horrific gang like MS-13, you could be deported from the country. That's part of the Securing America's Futures Act, which deals with a whole host of areas, including doing something nice for the DACA recipients, but also securing the border, more interior enforcement, E-Verify, which is a program that helps protect American citizens' jobs by assuring that the people who apply for jobs in the United States are eligible to take them, and also addressing the chain migration problem. We want to move toward a merit-based immigration system and eliminate the crazy and also the national security risk visa lottery program, where 55,000 people are given green cards every year simply for having their name drawn out of a computer. A really poor way to decide who should be permanent residents of the United States, we think.
If we wanted to sort of isolate, Chairman, the really, really bad, violent elements that become MS-13, what do we do to those who don't come into the country that way but morph into that maniac approach later on? And how do you weed that out?
The same thing. If you come into the country as a gang member, or if you become one after you get here, the provisions in our legislation would allow the government to remove you from the country. If they detected it when you came in, that's one way, but most of the time they find this out by virtue of investigations into gangs that are terrorizing thousands of communities all across our country.
The president is obviously highlighting this. A lot of people, a lot of his critics have said that it's morphed into an anti-immigrant stance, let alone anti-illegal immigrant stance. So obviously, I'm not surprised when I see this sort of reaction. But he was clearly and is clearly talking about the most dangerous of elements that are getting into this country too routinely. But what worries me, Chairman, I know you've looked into this, is that these groups, very violent groups that do the worst of things, are increasing and multiplying all over the country, particularly to where the president's going today.
Yeah, they are, and it is really sad that some here in Washington would like to try to analogize the president's comments about vicious, violent gang members with immigrants in general. We're a nation of immigrants. You and I and everybody watching this program can go back a few generations or several generations and find someone in their family who came here to better their lives. But we're also a nation of laws and respect for the rule of law, particularly when it comes to the kind of crime and mayhem, murder and rape that these gangs perpetrate, all the while selling illegal drugs and smuggling people and engaging in sex trafficking and everything else that's bad on the streets of many communities. They need to be dealt with severely. The president gets it, and I think most American people get it as well.
I'm switching gears slightly, if you don't mind, Congressman. The president is very concerned about this, what he's now called Spygate, evidence that the government agencies from the FBI to Justice Department had spies embedded in his campaign. They say those just looking for information as early as maybe the spring of 2016. Some have suggested a counsel to look into that, a prosecutor to separately look into that. Others have suggested the inspector general, given his load, just add to that and explore that. Where do you stand?
Sure. Well, the Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Rosenstein, has asked the Inspector General to add that to his list of things that he's reviewing regarding the 2016 election, both the investigation into Hillary Clinton and her aides, and the investigation that was subsequently launched into so-called Trump campaign Russia collusion. For a long, long time, I've been calling for the appointment of a second special counsel to look into all of these matters related to the shocking way that people at the top of the FBI, which is is the most respected law enforcement organization in the world, and thousands of people every day keep us safe, but
you don't think an inspector general could do that, sir? You think you need to hire another?
I think he can make a start at it, but he does not have prosecutorial powers. And I think that somebody who is completely outside of the Justice Department is needed. And by the way, we also have U.S. Attorney Huber from Utah, who I'm also pleased that Attorney General Sessions appointed to look into all of this. But again, he's not completely independent. He's outside of Main Justice. He's outside of Washington. But we need to have this thoroughly examined.